This video is sponsored by Normandy 1998, Christopher Mitchell, 212th Trooper, Sylar 1610 and Papa Podo. Hey everyone, happy belated April Fool's Day. As per tradition, I'll be using this holiday to explore a scenario from a franchise I haven't covered before, in this case, Star Trek, with the question of the day being, what if Spock stayed dead following Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan? This is a story I've wondered about for a long time, since it could have happened very easily, though to understand what I mean by that, a little behind-the-scenes context is necessary. During the climax of The Wrath of Khan, Spock sacrificed himself to save the Enterprise, though at the cost of his own life. This is because Leonard Nimoy requested that Spock be written out so he could exit the Star Trek franchise after having a bad time filming the previous movie, Star Trek the Motion Picture. However, these feelings quickly changed during the production of Wrath of Khan, which he found far more enjoyable, though by then the script called for Spock to die and it was too late for rewrites. As a workaround, Nimoy suggested the inclusion of Spock transferring his cartridge to Dr. McCoy, and then later having a shot of his torpedo fired on the Genesis planet, since through these two small additions, there would be a way to bring Spock back as seen in The Search for Spock. But what if Leonard Nimoy had stuck to his original position, or writer-director Nicholas Meyer had refused to allow for the changes? Then we would have a timeline in which Spock is truly gone, and his beloved crew would need to find a way to carry on without their favourite pointy-eared logic-spouting half-Vulcan. Since this is an April Fool's What If, I'm going to approach this in two different ways. First by going over what would have happened if the canon timeline remained exactly the same except for Spock being absent, and second by discussing what I believe the plots of the remaining movies would have been had Leonard Nimoy truly not returned. Starting off with the timeline in which events aren't changed, Kirk and crew return to Earth as ordered, during which time the Enterprise is decommissioned and they are all reassigned. As we saw at the start of Wrath of Khan, most of them appear to be serving as instructors at Starfleet Academy, so more than likely they go back there, albeit with a possible sabbatical for Kirk and Scotty still being assigned as chief engineer aboard the Excelsior. Unfortunately, this will be most of their last postings, as 3 months later the Whale probe shows up, disrupting all technology on Earth and in space dock, as well as causing massive environmental damage. In canon, it is Spock who suggests that the message from the probe may not be for humans, so without him, no one thinks of that, and even if they did, Kirk and co are trapped on Earth so they can't travel back in time to acquire the whales. Not that they could anyway, since it was Spock who did the calculations for the slingshot around the sun, which is seen in Star Trek Picard, requires an intellect on par with a Borg Queen, so it's not like just any Vulcan serving on another ship could do it. All this to say, Earth is destroyed in a matter of days, leading to the near extinction of humanity, as well as the deaths of Kirk, McCoy, Uhura, Sulu, and Chekhov, but not Scotty, since without the plan to sabotage the Excelsior, it would be in deep space by now, though it is likely recalled to serve as the flagship of the remnants of Starfleet, who would truthfully be rather lost as their entire command structure has just collapsed in an instant. However, this goes beyond just Starfleet to the Federation itself, as they have lost one of their founder worlds and the primary seat of their government, resulting in the need for a massive reshuffling that would leave them disorganized and vulnerable, particularly when much of their armada is gone. As a result, assuming they even still have an ambassador on Nimbus 3, when the call comes in regarding Cyborg taking the ambassadors hostage, the Federation likely decide to leave it to the Klingons, since they'll be furious about one of their own being taken. Ironically, the Klingons would be expecting the same of them, with Captain Kly heading there to engage the Federation, only to instead be captured by Cyborg, who would attempt to ram his bird of prey through the Great Barrier in the center of the universe. Unluckily for Spock's bro, this would more than likely fail, meaning he dies along with a lot of Klingons. And speaking of dead Klingons, the moon of Praxis still blows up 6 years later, kicking off the events of the undiscovered country, with the Klingon Chancellor Gorkon and Sarek discussing terms for peace with the Federation. Still being in a weakened state, the Federation would be quick to agree, with the Excelsior being assigned to escort the Chancellor. However, General Chang still orchestrates his assassination, resulting in that idiot Captain Styles dying in a Klingon gulag, all the while the follow-up attack on the Kinema Peace Accords goes off without a hitch, allowing Chang to rally his people to war, especially when the Federation has just lost its head of state for the second time in a decade, proving just how weak they are. And in this assessment, the Klingons are correct, since when you put a hardened warrior culture who are desperate for new territory so they don't go extinct, up against a Federation who are still recovering from 2 significant losses, the Klingons almost certainly win that war. And that is to say nothing of external aid from other major powers such as the Romulan Star Empire, since the Romulan ambassador was also a part of Chang's coup, so it stands to reason when war breaks out, the Empire are either allying with them directly if they believe they can use this to leverage power in the aftermath, or forging a pact of friendship and non-aggression like they did with the Dominion while watching from the sidelines. Either way, by the 2360s, when we enter the next generation era, the Federation is surely wiped out, and the predominant power in the Alpha and Beta quadrants is the Klingon Empire, likely with the Romulans pulling the strings from behind the scenes. And that is likely the way it remains for a long, long time. time, since it's doubtful Q is ever appearing to put a Klingon captain on trial for the sins of their barbarous race, and thus never introduces them to the Borg, while in turn it's very unlikely the Prophets possess a Klingon or Romulan to become the mother of their emissary, since neither of those races are probably ever getting involved with the Cardassian occupation of Bajor, so it's entirely possible the occupation either carries on indefinitely, or if the Cardassians do leave of their own accord, they almost certainly cripple the planet's resources even worse on their way out, due to not having to worry about Federation reprisal. However, assuming that the Prophets will have always created an emissary due to existing outside linear time, and thus being unaffected by changes in history, I believe the most likely candidates would either be Kira, since she may be given command of Terok Nor if the Cardassians vacate it, or more controversially, Zial, who may have Descartes' ear if he is still prefect. Either way, they would be positioned to have the station moved, likely to avoid Klingon or Romulan attack, thus alerting them to the presence of the wormhole. Though, this may not be a good thing, since if the Bajorans are the ones to first encounter the Dominion, they will either be subjugated as they were under the Cardassians, or they will face extermination when they refuse to be enslaved again. While if the Cardassians, or more specifically Descartes, meet the Dominion first, he'll cut the same deal and kick off the Dominion invasion of the Alpha Quadrant, albeit with very different consequences, since even if a Klingon-Romulan alliance is forged, which it very well may not be if the Dominion simply infiltrate and take over before either faction realizes their leaders have been replaced by changelings, it will fall against the might of the Jem'Hadar, Cardassia, and possibly the Brain, meaning before long, the Alpha and Beta Quadrants will live to serve the Founders. So, there you have it. Either the Klingons and Romulans run the show while the Cardassians continue their rule over Bajor and other worlds, or the Dominion conquers everything. Either way, it's a pretty grim turn of events, all thanks to the absence of one man. However, what if instead of letting the universe be screwed over, the writers change the plots of the movies in a way that keeps Earth from being destroyed and the Federation from falling into disarray? Well, that's what I'd like to talk about in this next section. Starting off with Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, it would most obviously not be called The Search for Spock. Instead, it might be called something like Star Trek III Genesis, or Star Trek III Remembrance, in keeping with the later movies. Or for something more in line with that era of Star Trek movie title, how about Star Trek III The Ties That Bind? If you have a better movie title, please let me know in the comments. Though, jumping into the actual story, I believe a lot of the first act would go the same, except with Bones not having Spock's Katra, there'd be no scene in Spock's quarters or McCoy seemingly going insane. Instead, it would be Kirk who finds himself disorientated and wandering as he reflects on Spock's sacrifice and the fact that his crew are drifting apart, with the Enterprise being decommissioned, Scotty being assigned to the Excelsior, and McCoy getting a promotion to head instructor at Starfleet Medical, so we can't even rely on him for counsel anymore. As for James T himself, he's unsure of where to go next for the first time in his life, since some of Spock's last advice to him was to get back in command of a starship, but by doing so he got his friend killed. Eventually, he is offered to be the new Starfleet liaison for Project Genesis as they now begin exploring the Genesis planet, though he will be stationed at Starfleet HQ. Figuring this will allow him to spend more time with his son David, Kirk accepts, and the pair share a scene over comms as David arrives at the planet, only for communications to abruptly cut out, with scans showing the ship David used to reach the Genesis planet is now gone, most likely destroyed. This would lead to an argument between Kirk and the Fleet Admiral about sending a ship to investigate and if necessary rescue David, with the Fleet Admiral stating they have no ships to spare on what might be a sensor glitch, while Kirk, who fears for his son, offers to go aboard the Enterprise, only to be shot down as it's in permanent dry dock. Unsurprisingly, this would lead to the theft of the Enterprise like in canon, except Uhura would join them as there's no planned rendezvous on Vulcan, with the skeleton crew making their way to the Genesis planet where Kruge and his ship are waiting. Tragically, the Enterprise would still be forced to self-destruct, though this time it would be an even harder decision for Kirk, since it's the ship Spock gave his life to save. However, Kirk's friends would ultimately convince him it was the crew Spock really cared about, with the Admiral accepting this and honouring his friend's legacy by saying goodbye to the Enterprise, the past, and Spock himself at last. On the upside, due to having lost his best friend and ship, Kirk probably wouldn't be made to lose his son as well, instead beaming down and fighting Kruge to save David before they escape on the Klingon bird of prey as Genesis destroys itself. From here, we'd get the final scenes from the voyage home, in which Kirk and co return to Earth and face court-martial, with the verdict being a demotion to captain for Kirk, thus allowing him to continue doing what he does best. Though, along with a new ship, he'll also need a new science officer, and with Project Genesis now defunct, the final shot of the movie would be Field Commissioned Officer David Marcus striding onto the bridge of the Enterprise A, now dressed in Starfleet red, as he takes his place at the science station, and his proud father gives the command to jump to warp, as they speed off to their next adventure. Speaking of next adventures, the following film is Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home, and for the most part it would be unaffected, with David simply taking Spock's role and getting them back in time, while the reason that would be given for why the crew is off Earth would be that they just finished a mission and are returning to report in when the whale probe strikes. Unfortunately, some comedy would be lost due to Spock's fish-out-of-water routine not working with the all-human crew, and the lack of a mind meld with the whales would require some other way to get the exposition gained from that. Though, all in all, it still pans out the same, with the ending being them celebrating Earth's salvation in the ocean as they've already done the court-martial. The next movie, Star Trek V: The Final Frontier, is another interesting one to explore thanks to Cyborg and his role as Spock's brother. However, I feel that can still work, as now rather than he and Spock interacting, he would serve as a reminder of the old loss, thus possibly making the crew of the Enterprise A somewhat reluctant to fight the brother of their old comrade. In fact, in true old-school sci-fi fashion, it may well be that in this timeline Leonard Nimoy returns to the franchise to play Cyborg, similarly to Denise Crosby coming back as Sealer, since perhaps after 7 years away he might be willing to don the pointy ears once more. As for his scheme, Cyborg would be unchanged, with the difference being in how the crew and namely Kirk approach dealing with him. Instead of going in phases blazing, upon learning who their opponent is and his goal, I believe Kirk would willingly offer him passage on the Enterprise, figuring he could talk him out of his mad scheme to meet God like Spock would often do to him. This would allow for a much more character-driven story as Cyborg interacts with the crew and namely Kirk, in a manner similar to Laura or Thomas Riker, while also exploring Cyborg's ideology of the pain everyone has more in depth, since the very present pain would be the renewed sense of grief for Spock, which Cyborg could both soothe through his powers and exacerbate through his presence, a fact he would understand well, since Spock's absence would be a frequent topic of discussion, and part of his reason for wanting to see God, as among other things, he wishes to understand why his little brother had to die so young for a Vulcan. Ultimately, however, this time of discussion and contemplation would come to an end, as Kirk's attempts to dissuade Cyborg would fall on deaf ears, with the result being a more tragic capturing of the ship, since this Cyborg has been positioned as a heartsick philosopher who the audience has come to know and understand rather than a pure zealot. From here, much of the film would resume its canon course, with them reaching Shakari and encountering the false god alien whose petulance finally convinces Cyborg that he was wrong. As a result, he requests Kirk's forgiveness before sacrificing his life to hold the alien back, with this allowing the Enterprise to escape, though in a somber state as the crew know that for all his flaws, Cyborg was not a bad man, just one who tried to take pain away from others, but could never let go of his own. After this would come the final TOS movie, The Undiscovered Country, and I believe this would be the one best served by Spock's absence, or more accurately David's presence, as he would be serving as co-lead with Kirk in this movie. Like in canon, the setup would be the same, with the Praxis incident leading to the Federation Klingon peace talks, though fortunately, due to David not being murdered, Kirk wouldn't be giving off so much of the racist grandpa energy that William Shatner himself hated for the character. Instead, he would simply be suspicious of these negotiations, having fought the Klingons for most of his life and seen how treacherous they can be, while the voice of optimism for this new arrangement would be David, since despite being attacked and held captive by the Klingons on the Genesis planet, he does not hold any ill will towards the race. This would allow for a story about the old guard providing wisdom born of experience, while in turn being careful not to pass on the old wounds and grievances of the past to those who would succeed them, as well as to recognize and embrace what the next generation has to offer. This would be orchestrated through the parallels of Kirk and Chang as the warrior bastions of the old age who reject the new, while being contrasted with David and Gorkon's daughter Azetbur, who are a scientist and diplomat respectively, with this being seen early on in the dinner scene, where they alone are able to talk across the table without hostility and mistrust. Unfortunately, due to this being the exception and not the rule, Gorkon is still assassinated, with Kirk and McCoy being charged with the crime, though here things would change, as while the pair are still subjected to a kangaroo court and sent to Rura Penthe, causing the Enterprise crew to conduct their own investigation, David makes the rash, and very Kirk-like decision, to seek Azetbur's help in this, bringing out the logical inconsistencies, and asking her to trust him that something isn't right. Despite having every reason to hate the humans, Azetbur's belief in peace like her father before her convinces her to agree. Though when she goes to conduct the secret rendezvous with the Enterprise, Chang strikes once more, attempting to make it look like they lured the new Chancellor in claiming good faith only to kill her, since this will ensure an age of war. Fortunately, due to having anticipated something like this, the Enterprise crew has already contacted Sulu on the Excelsior, meaning when the treasonous Klingon general attacks, he is instead caught off guard and forced to flee in a damaged ship. Though surmising he's heading to Camp Khitomer to derail the Accords, the united Enterprise, Excelsior, and Kronos 1 race off, first to rescue and exonerate Kirk and McCoy just before they can be assassinated, and then to Khitomer, where the sight of the three hero ships working as one is used to encapsulate one of the major themes of the film. Together, the groups then expose the coup, with Kirk getting to have a quick fight with Chang for good measure before he and his co-conspirators are apprehended, allowing the historic Khitomer Accords to be signed, thanks to the belief of young idealists and the wisdom of old heroes. Then, on that happy note, the Enterprise crew depart for one final voyage together, as the credits roll. And that is what I believe would have happened if Spock had stayed dead. If you have any alternate theories about how things would have gone, post them in the comments, and while you're down there, let me know if you want more Star Trek content outside of April Fool's Day. But with that said, thank you so much for listening, I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts, suggestions, or screams of rage in the comments below.